with us. I promise it's going to be worthwhile. By the way, if you're at the back, there's still some seats in the middle here, more to the front, available, so do not hesitate to come closer. Let's make it very cozy, let's make it intimate, and at the same time, very worldly. Our next guest, I mean, you're lucky. It's a unique encounter that you are going to have. It's a privilege to hear our next guest share his ideas. His name is Shigeru Ban. He's an architect and a professor at Keio University in Japan. He won the Pritzker Prize, which is as much as the Nobel Prize of Architecture, so to speak. But most of all, he's a man who thinks out of the box. He's actually a very widely interested man. He's also very musical, for example. Originally, he wanted to become a carpenter, a love for craftsmanship, for wood, for the tradition of building, creating with wooden materials. He got from a very young age. Later, he decided it would be architecture after all, and he studied in the US and in Europe, but never ceased to be inspired by his Japanese roots. It's a man with a very big heart, putting his talents to use, not only to create for the wealthy and powerful, but also for people like you and me, and for people who are unwittingly caught up in disaster or dire circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shigeru Ban.
Hello, thank you very much for coming for this festival. As a part of the ambassador of New European Bauhaus high round table, I'm really honored to present my project in front of you. But also, this for the 45-minute session, first 25 minutes, I'm going to show you my project working in disaster area as an architect. Then I'm going to bring my student, actually I met just today first time, assembling the partition system, which we are working in for the Ukrainian refugees now. So they're going to demonstrate to you what we are doing in all over the Europe for hosting the refugees. After I graduated the Cooper Union School of Architecture in New York, I practiced 10 years. Then I was very disappointed about my own profession as an architect, because we are mostly working for privileged people, not for the society. The privileged people who has money and power, because power and money is invisible, they hire us to make a monument, to show off their power to the public. I'm not saying I'm not interested in making the monument, I love to do it, but I was very disappointed. We are just working for particular people who has money. But I thought I can use my knowledge and experiences not only for privileged people, but also the general public, even people who lost their houses by disasters. So this is why I started working in disaster area. Also, as you know, in Japan, we have any natural disaster, earthquake, flooding, typhoon. Now we have facing the nuclear problem also. And particularly, for example, the earthquake never kill people, but collapse of the building kill people. That's our responsibility as an architect. However, when cities are rebuilt, there is a new project coming for architects, so they are looking for new project after the disaster. However, I found out before cities are rebuilt, the victims of the disaster are facing and suffering at a very poor living condition in shelters and temporary houses before cities are rebuilt. So I thought this is our responsibility as an architect in order to improve their living condition before cities are rebuilt. That is why I started working in disaster area. Can I start my slide, please? I use concrete, steel, wood, anything, any material. But also what I invented is using paper tube made of recycled paper. Actually, we are demonstrating this with the real material. When I start my practice, I didn't have any experience designing architecture, so I was designing exhibition. This is my first exhibition for my favorite architect from Finland, Alvar Aalto. Because Alvar Aalto uses a lot of natural material like wood, I want to design the exhibition like Alvar Aalto's architecture. However, I had very small, limited budget of the exhibition, so that I had to look for some alternative material. Then I found the paper tube, which was used for the drafting paper, fax paper roll, also the films. That was available. I hate to throw things away. So here, small diameter tube used as a sealing. This is what Alberto designed in B-Freeze library. And the larger diameter tube was used as a freestanding partition. Then I found out material is much, much stronger than I expected. Next, please. So I started testing with engineers in order to use this recycled paper tube as a main building structural material. So that then we found the good data. Next, please. Then actually I started developing the structure before people start talking about environment, sustainability, recycling. This was started in 1985 before people start talking about the environment. So this is not because of environmental issue. I just didn't want to waste material. So this is my own weekend house, which is not used because I have no weekend. I'm traveling every time, so it's still empty. But this was built 1990 in order to get government permission with the paper tube as a main permanent building material. So this house is still there. It's very clean because I'm not using. Next, please. Then also I built some arch structure, and I also designed the paper tube with the wooden joint. Again, I got the government permission to make as a permanent building. Next, please. Then year 2000, everyone all over the world start talking about the environment issue. So this is a pavilion for World Expo in Hanover City in Germany. I was asked, because I was the only one in Japan that was using recyclable material for building. So I was chosen to design Japanese pavilion. This is all the paper tube locally made in Germany. And as a part of the contract with the paper tube company, I asked them to collect all the used paper after the building dismantled, because the expo is only for half a year. Then they have to recycle as a part of the contract. Also, I didn't want to use the concrete, because concrete is rather difficult material to recycle. So here is foundation made of wooden box filled with sand. And also this joint of paper tube is just fabric tape. It's very inexpensive, easy to reuse. And the membrane, normally membrane is made of this. This is this material is not actually environmental friendly. So I invented the material, the paper is can be fire protected and also waterproof. So that this is the paper roofing material we invented. Next, please. Now, going to the disaster situation. 1994, there is the genocide in Rwanda between two tribes, Tutsi and Hutu, and over 2 million people became refugees. And I saw these two photos in the magazines, and I was very surprised. This is the shelters made by UN, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and the refugees are freezing with blanket. And I read the article, during the rainy season, this shelter is not good enough to keep them warm. So I thought we have to improve the shelter, otherwise any medical care doesn't help them. So I wrote a letter to United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva. Of course, no reply. So I went to there without any appointment, and I was very lucky to meet German architect who was responsible for the shelter construction, and he had some problem. And because of that, I was hired as a consultant to develop my idea further. I will explain why. This is a typical shelter made by UNHCR. Refugees have to cut the trees to make a frame, and they put the plastic sheet given by UN, 4 meters by 6 meters. Over 2 million people cut the trees. So this area used to be the forest, but all the trees gone. And they go much farther to cut more trees. So this cause the very serious environmental deforestation and the environmental problem. So that is why UN start providing them aluminum pipes. But aluminum is very expensive material locally. Refugees sold them out for money and cut the trees again. That's why providing aluminum pipe was not a good solution. So that was the timing I met this German architect to propose my idea of recycled paper tube for the structure. Next, please. And one of the good Swiss furniture company supported us to make a different prototypes. And we also built in Rwanda. The issue was I want to give them something more comfortable. However, because of UN policies, they want them to go back to home as soon as possible. So they think if we give them something too comfortable, they're going to stay longer. That's why my project was only to replace the wood by paper tube, and the budget was only $50 per unit. That was our budget. That's why it's a very simple shelter with a paper tube frame and the UN tarpaulins. Next, please. Year after, 1995, city of Kobe, Japan, we had a big earthquake and on the big fire. And I found out there is the Vietnamese refugees living in Kobe, because that's the first time Japanese government accepted formally the refugees from Vietnam, and they are living and studying in the city of Kobe. Because they are Catholic people, they are gathering even after the earthquake at the Catholic church. And I thought that former refugees must have a more difficult time than normal Japanese victims. So I went to church, but it was still, after the fire, it was so difficult to find the church without any address, but I found out all the building was destroyed by earthquake and fire. Only the statue remained outside. People was having morning service around the fire. I proposed the priest, why don't we rebuild the church out of paper? He didn't trust me. Actually, he thought I'm crazy to propose making building out of paper after the fire. But I didn't give up. I commuted the church morning service every Sunday from Tokyo. Next, please. Then I got to know the Vietnamese people, they are living like this in the park. In shiny days, inside of the shelter become over 40 degrees. Rainy days, totally floor get wet. Also, Japanese government started making temporary houses. City of Kobe is so dense. Most of the houses was built outside of the city. But these Vietnam people has only chance to work in particular area, particular factory. So if they move out from center of the city, they're going to lose their job. That's why they wanted to keep living in the park, even such a poor condition. Also, Japanese neighbor people try to kick them out. They afraid this park is becoming like a slum. So I thought that we have to provide something more, something healthier, but also something very looks very temporary to be accepted by neighbor to keep living here. So I gathered my student and making the shelter out of paper tube and beer crates, and we put some sandbag inside because of the hurricane typhoon. This is the interior. People was living there for 4 years like this, and so they are very happy that it's much better than living like this, better than this. Next, please. Then finally, priest trusted me to rebuild the church with me. So he gave me a small land, 10 meter by 15 meter. And again, I brought my student with a paper tube. It's very lightweight, inside is empty, of course. And this is the result. This is inside is oval shape, which is coming from one of my favorite church in Rome, designed by Bernini. So here is the priest. He said this is just fine to use only 2 or 3 years, but actually this was there for 10 years. This church and used as a community center became the symbol of this city, accepting many concert, movie, gathering, wedding, so on. Then after 10 years, city was totally rebuilt, and the church decided to rebuild. I was happy to redesign. Also, there is a big earthquake in Taiwan, and we decided to donate this church to Taiwan. Next, please. So we disassembled this, sent over by ship, and assembled again. So this is in Puri, village of Puri in Taiwan. This became permanent church and community center in Taiwan. Then I was thinking, what is the definition of temporary structure and what is the definition of the permanent structure? As you can see as a victim, in the big city, even Brussels or Tokyo or wherever, you can see that the big developer buy the building, destroy it, and put a new one. So even building made in concrete can be very temporary as long as the building was built to make money. However, even such a building made in paper can be permanent building if people love it. That is my definition of what is temporary and what is permanent. Next, please. 1999 in Turkey, they have big earthquake, and I was asked to make temporary houses. All the material except this roofing, I just asked the Japanese contractor to donate plastic sheet I brought over. However, all the paper tube and plastic beer crate was donated free from local manufacturers. And so we made a 50 unit with volunteer people. Next, please. 2001, west side of India, they had earthquake, and I was asked to come to build temporary houses again. And this paper tube was found very easily from local fabric manufacturer. Because the process of making paper tube is so easy with a very small machine, this manufacturer of the fabric have their own paper tube. So we just bought very cheaply. And the only problem was I couldn't find any beer crates. Because in this area, nobody drink beer, nobody drink alcohol. So local architect, the Indian architect recommended me to use a Coca-Cola, red Coca-Cola crate, but also that is out of context. So we made the foundation and floor out of traditional method of the mud. Some of them are used as a house, some of them used as a school. And I was surprised, 2 years ago, my local architect sent me a photo that this temporary house was still used as a local clinic. So this was built 2001, so which means already 21 years there. So still used because people really care of this. Next, please. And also the Sumatra earthquake, there is many the city around destroyed, including this village in south of Sri Lanka, Kirinda. Village was totally destroyed by tsunami. And I went to there to build 50 units of the permanent houses with locally available mud cement brick with volunteer people. And actually, I created a new problem because some of the village people, their house was not destroyed, but they envied the house I designed. So they said, "Oh, I'm gonna destroy my house. Please build one for me." But that was a nice reaction from local people. Next, please. 2008, in China, Sichuan, this area in the city of Chengdu, they had a huge earthquake when they had a Beijing Olympic. Over 30,000 people killed. Also, because of the poor construction, many of the schools are destroyed. And as soon as this happened, I went there to start making temporary houses, but the local government didn't want any foreigner to make the temporary houses. But instead, I met a schoolmaster. She had the elementary school, and she has no classroom. So I just brought my student to work with the local Chinese student for 5 weeks to build 9 classrooms over 500 square meters with paper tube with a wooden joint. Everything was made by the student. Next, please. This is the inside of the classroom. As you see, the children look so happy because they could come back to their original school. And this also still exists. Next, please. 2009, L'Aquila, near Rome, the old city was totally destroyed, like this. And I went to there, and I met the mayor. He said that the L'Aquila is very famous for music. They have their own Philharmonic Orchestra and the School of Music, but there are no place to play. All the concert hall was destroyed by earthquake. So I promised to make temporary concert hall. The mayor gave me the land in free. But also, that time, do you remember him? Very famous. He's a former Prime Minister of Italy, Mr. Berlusconi. And he invited G8 summit, that time G8, not G7, because Russia was part of this. He invited them, he wanted to invite them to his resort island, fancy conference. But because of this aspect, he decided suddenly to bring the world leader to L'Aquila. Then Japanese embassy in Rome organized the nice press conference with 2 prime ministers. And I'm sure that Mr. Berlusconi doesn't know what he's holding. This is a paper chip sample. Because of this fabulous press conference, I got €500,000, next please, to build temporary concert hall. And again, I didn't want to use a concrete wall, so this wall is made of scaffolding and a sandbag to have a good sound insulation. But because it's so ugly, I just got the red curtain donated, just rounded. Inside is a paper tube. It's not structure, it's just for different diameter for the acoustical reasons. And the exterior tube, these are structural tube in paper. And 250 seats, and this is still the symbol concert hall in L'Aquila, Italy exists. Next, please. 2010, Haiti in Caribbean Ocean. This small island, left half is Haiti, right half is the Dominican Republic. And because of the capital, Port-au-Prince, all the airport and the port was closed, so I had to fly to Santo Domingo in Santo Domingo to drive over 7 hours, finding out the situation like this. Because no materials were available in Haiti, so all the material was prepared in the university in Santo Domingo, brought over to teach the local victims to build by themselves with a paper tube and just plastic sheet. Next, please. 2011, northern Japan. You must still remember we had a big earthquake, tsunami, and also nuclear problem, including the city of Fukushima. And this is a typical the facility for the victim of the earthquake. They have to stay here for 4 months until government temporary houses are built. No privacy. So that they suffer without privacy, especially women. It's impossible to stay like this. So I found out some of the women stay in the car and get injured or they pass away because of the economic class syndrome. So I thought the privacy is most basic human right we have to provide. So I started making the partition out of paper tube, which you're gonna see today, the small, the larger diameter with whole small diameter just inserted. That's it. And just the fabric curtain with a safety pin. So depending on the size of the families, 2 of them, 6 of them, we can extend depending on the size to provide the very comfortable place. But it's important, it has to be flexible, open, close, but still privacy is very important. Next, please. Then people has to move into the very poor temporary houses made by government. But I thought some of the area doesn't have enough land to make a single-story standard government house. So I proposed 3-story temporary house with a shipping container. The shipping container was stuck as a checkerboard pattern in order to reduce the number of the container. And inside the container, there has a bathroom unit and the bedroom. And in between space, the public space, like a living, dining space. There is no concrete foundation, just steel plate, and just stuck on top of each other. Next, please. And result is like this. So that that size and the budget was exactly the same as what government make for the poor temporary houses. But if we have some idea and also the love to the victims, we can make something better. Even this furniture was made by my student. Next, please. 2015 in the Philippines, they had a big typhoon and earthquake. And I went to there with my student, working with local student. There's also paper tube is available anywhere in the world. And the wall is made of locally available woven bamboo sheet. Only problem was a beer crate. In Philippines, they have big beer company called San Miguel, but they didn't want to donate us. So finally, I had to use the red Coca-Cola crates. Next, please. 2000, this is also 2015 in Nepal. They have a big earthquake. All the buildings are built with bricks. So that I went to there and I proposed the earthquake, the house system which meets the Japanese standard with using the brick. So this is just a testing piece I did in Japan. Wooden frame with a brick inside to make the bearing wall. So we made the houses with this construction method using label of the destroyed building, and also some of the area where the brick was not available, we made also school with the stone. Next, please. 2011, 2 weeks before the earthquake in Japan, there is a big earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. This most important cathedral was totally destroyed. And I got the email from the priest. He saw that the article about me. There is an architect who can design temporary church free of charge. I told him that if the temporary church is used not only for the religious service, but also community services, I'm happy to do it. So in between commuting the earthquake area in Japan, I also commuted to New Zealand. And I analyzed original church with golden section as rules to use this same rule for a new design. Next, please. This is a paper cathedral with locally available paper tube. The foundation is shipping container as an office here. And this became the now tourist destination and also symbol of the city. So this was supposed to be temporary. Again, this became permanent church. Next, please. This is the last one I'm walking now. This is the train station of Helm. Helm is 25 kilometers away from the border of Ukraine. Because of the Ukrainian train, the width of the rail is different. Also, this is diesel. So they have to get out here to register at the immigration and stay over in the big roof under the big roof without any privacy. So I saw the news beginning of the March, and the situation was exactly the same as what we have seen in Japan without any privacy. So I thought it's necessary to provide them privacy. So I sent my material to my friend, the Hubert. He's also ambassador of New European Bauhaus. He's an architect from Poland. And we have been communicating online on 1 year, so I never met him. But immediately I sent the material. He started moving, convincing the mayors and so on. So he did the next, please. Really great job. Also, I had very lucky. I had a former Polish student in my school. He now became a professor. He brought his student. And this is how we just drilled the paper tube to put the smaller tube. And this in the city supermarket of the Helm, we built 1,200 units. And 900 units was installed here. And the tube and the curtain was donated from local companies. And rest of 900 units was sent to the review in Ukraine, and the local Ukrainian architects built by themselves. So this is when they came in to stay here. Next, please. So this is another train station in Poland, and I was not there, but my former student, he told me one lady came into the space, she started crying. Because she brought their children with very difficult situation, running away from Ukraine, and even she couldn't cry in front of the public. As soon as she got a private space, she started crying. So I was very touched that this just a public partition gives them the kind of safety and the comfort where they can cry. Next, please. This is in Paris. There's two gymnasium. This is my staff with my teacher, Voluntary Architects Network, and this is my team. And this is in the facility near the Gare du Nord and Gare de l'Est. Next, please. And Slovakia, also the IKEA supported, give us the curtain free. Next, please. This is a review in Ukraine. This was like this. So we sent over the partition system. They built by themselves. Now it's like this. So can you come up, please, the student? Would you like to introduce yourself? There is some mic. Do you have mic? Mic? Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. Oui, bonjour. Nous sommes des étudiants en architecture à la Camborta, à la fac qui se trouve à Flagey. Et on est en BA3 et en Master 1. Voilà.
Just please introduce your name.
My name is Sarah.
My name is Damien and I'm very pleased to be here today.
My name is Manon.
My name is Lucie.
So
Et
now
Anna, du coup.
they're gonna make this partition system in front of you. Okay, please start. As you see, it's very easy. Although I just found out they practice 10 times. But it's not necessary to practice. As you see, it's very easy. And just you put the safety pin. Two of safety pins enough. Not, you don't need three. Just two on both sides. Two is enough for today.
Right. Well, we put only two?
Yeah, only two,
right.
both sides.
No,
No, just leave it. No, just leave it. Just put two.
All right.
No, just two is enough for today.
Okay, I mean.
Yeah. And when we need to extend, there is a smaller tubes to insert here to extend any length you like, depending on the necessity and depending on the size of the family. Maybe you can build the bed outside, so it's easier for people to see. Yeah. This is the bed made of cardboard. Shall we put this inside? Yeah, just put this way. Yeah. Voila, that's all. It's so easy. But it's, thank you very much. Would you like to say something? Your some opinion? Can I? It's very important to work with students, not because just they are free labor, but it's a part of, just a part of education. You're gonna be the leader of next generation, so that it's very important to work with somebody like you. So yeah, thank you. So you have some impression of, was it difficult or was it?
No, in fact, it was very, very easy. As you can see, it took less than 5 minutes. So yes, the main objective was to do it very quickly, and I think we did it. And yeah, thank you very much.
I think that's all. I think we have 5 more minutes. Maybe somebody want to see this. They can come up to the stage to. No? No? It's too difficult?
Just
No, no.
very comfortable.
Ah.
It's all right.
Sorry, next time. So you have to disassemble? Yes. Okay. But anyway, so even this partition with fabric gives them very different condition. Okay, thank you. Let's disassemble.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was a unique experience. An applause for the students and for Shigeru Ban.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for
Thank you.
I have one more question, though, if I may.
Yes, of course.
This is paper tubes, but in this economic crisis time, so to speak, there are reports of the price of paper going up, and at times of shortages during the COVID pandemic, for example, everybody ordering things online and we needing lots of boxes to send things back and forth. Can that ever be a problem?
No, but still, even this price goes higher, still very inexpensive. But also, it's so kind, all the manufacturers provide us a free of charge. They are very generous. So, well, but anything can be replaced with such a material.
The value of sharing and of donating and of wanting to contribute to a proper shelter for people in need. So.
But actually, I'm preparing for the next stage, second phase, building affordable housing in Ukraine. I'm working with my colleague of the New European Bauhaus in Poland, making some prototype using the material not used for the building normally, which can be built easily, quickly, cheaply, inexpensively. So we're going to move to the next stage for reconstruction of the city with the affordable housing.
And with other materials
Other
still
material.
than paper?
Not paper, actually.
No. Can you say something more about that?
Yeah, it's a foam core. This is normally used for the insulation of the house with some reinforced plastic. This is a technology to use a boat with a foam core with lightweight. So this is the modular system can be built without any equipment.
I see.
And very insulated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So the thinking out of the box never ceases. Shigeru Ban, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And in a couple of minutes, a house has been erected, and in a couple of minutes, it's been taken apart again. Thank you, Madam Commissioner, for being here with us. Have a very nice afternoon. And thank you for being here. And do stay, because Mr. Ban is very generous with his time. This is not the only contribution to this afternoon he will be doing. He'll take part in the next a panel discussion as well on how to transform cities in times of global climate crisis. It's a panel moderated by Niklas Maak. I'll tell you more about it in a moment. Also, I want to point out that there are lots of things to discover here on the Mont des Arts. On the Kunstberg, workshops are being done, innovations are being shown, new inventions, people are showcasing their artwork, so do take a stroll. It's lovely weather. Sorry?
What? He's also ambassador of New European Bauhaus.
Yes, so he was talking about me, so I was implementing the paper partition system in Poland, and we were sending it to the Ukraine, and I have also talked about it today in the morning in the panel, standing up with the Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you for being here, and good luck with all the work. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you go for a stroll, you'll discover nice things, I promise. But do be back at, let's see, 1800, 6 o'clock. That's when the next panel, including Mr. Ban, will start here on this stage. So see you in a couple of minutes. Enjoy. Bye-bye. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready for the next panel discussion, and we're joined, as promised, by Professor Ban. Actually, the panel will be building upon some of Professor Ban's ideas, the ideas he talked about earlier today, and at the same time, there will be experts from other fields around the table as well. The panel will be looking at cities and at society at large in times of global climate change. And immediately several questions come to mind, like how does climate change affect cities? And also, how can cities and life in cities adapt to anticipate on life in changing circumstances? It's something I think we're all very aware of, that is happening. Wherein also lie the threats, but also perhaps the opportunities to build, live, organize, breathe, and be in cities in a sustainable way. Sustainable, one of the values of this new European Bauhaus Festival, as you well know. Those are some of the questions that will be addressed by our next panel, introduced to you in a moment and moderated by Niklas Maak, Professor of Architecture at the Stedel Institute of Fine Arts in Frankfurt, also in Harvard, and Culture and Arts Editor of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany. Dr. Maak, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Hello, good evening. I'm very thrilled and happy and honored to be here in Brussels tonight and to present you a wonderful panel of 4 people, 3 live here, 1 on screen from Rome. 4 people who, if you want to look for solutions for the future of the city, I think we cannot imagine any better panel. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and let me quickly introduce our guests in alphabetical order. We start with Markus Bader, to my right. He studied architecture in London and in Berlin, but he is much more than an architect. He founded a practice called Raumlabor in Berlin with many friends. And Raumlabor is not an architectural office. It is a collective that has created a totally new form of production of something that is more than architecture, that is something we could call urban practice, or the creation of new social spaces which are sustainable not only in an ecological but also in a social way. So I'm very happy to have him here and talk especially about 2 projects that have become almost worldwide known, because he is also the winner of the Golden Lion of the Architectural Biennial in Venice for a project called the Floating University. And already the name indicates that we have here something which is floating, reacting to a situation of precarity in times of climate change, but it's also a university. And not only a university as you know it, but a new typology of university built in Berlin next to the airport of Tempelhof. So I'm very happy to talk with him about this project in a minute. But we have another guest here to his right, your left, Shigeru Ban, who I don't have to introduce because A, he was on stage an hour ago, and B, he is a famous architect and forerunner of what we could call an ecological movement in architecture. Already at the time when others were still using tons of concrete and glass to build high-rise towers, he surprised the world with architecture built from paper. And I remember going to Hanover in the year 2000. I was blown away by an architecture that you saw and you couldn't believe that it could stand. It was basically completely made from cardboard and tubes. A wonderful example. Some people here know, of course, his Centre Pompidou in Metz. Shigeru studied architecture in California, in New York, worked with Isozaki, and then founded his office in 1985, and immediately got involved in a discourse that can be seen in retrospect as one of the most groundbreaking changes, paradigmatic changes in how we not only produce architecture, but how we produce space also in times of crisis. We had a little possibility to listen to his presentation an hour ago about what he did in the context of architecture for refugees in moments of crisis, and I'm very happy to talk on this topic of the city of the future in times of global crisis with him in a minute. Also, of course, I'm happy to talk about the connection of the ecological question and the social question with you, because I think your architecture has responses to both of these questions. We have, from Uganda, Hilda Flavia Nakabuye, who is not an architect, but a civil rights activist, a climate activist, and the founder of Fridays for Future Uganda. And I'm especially happy that you are with us today, because if we talk about Europe and the global crisis and global climate change, of course, we have to talk about the connection Europe has with countries in Africa. And as you know, of course, in Belgium, in Germany, we have a very violent colonial history with African countries, and I think it's an urgency to discuss in a very critical way new forms of cooperation and collaboration in a time where extractive practices and economic developments, which are still exploitative, are still happening, and where we have to come up with a new narrative of how we could shape a future cohabitation between African and European countries. So I'm very happy to have you here and talk about your work. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Hans-Joachim, or internationally known as John Schellenhuber, who is a climatologist, a theoretical physicist, that's what he studied, and of course, worldwide known as a founding director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. This institute alone, we could talk for 3 hours about it. It has changed the way we talk about the city, how we talk about the planet, how we prove that there is climate change. Because when John started his work, most people thought that climate change might happen, might not happen, might not be so urgent. And he was basically the first person who proved and developed theories with his team that show how urgent this topic is. He worked for a long time at the Potsdam Institute. He only recently, and I'm happy to discuss that with you, John, he only recently discovered the role of architecture, and he founded something which is called the Bauhaus der Erde. This is not to be confounded with the new European Bauhaus. So there is almost a wave of Bauhauses coming up, and I'm very happy to talk with him about what the Bauhaus der Erde is and how it is to be distinguished from the new European Bauhaus. He also comes from a little village, he often told, near Passau, where you have a long tradition of wooden houses. So I'm also happy to talk with him and the experts for architecture with sustainable material, also about that heritage. I want to start this evening, this hour that we have, with a presentation, again in alphabetical order, because we couldn't decide whom to ask first as a speaker. So again, alphabetical order. I'm very happy to ask Markus Bader to talk a little bit about the project that won the Golden Lion in Venice, and to talk about another project which I personally love a lot. It's called Haus der Statistik, and it is a concrete monster, an old ministry in the middle of Berlin that was supposed to be torn down. And then luckily there was an initiative to say, in times of climate crisis, we cannot take down something. And Shigeru said this an hour ago, you cannot just, as a developer, go into the city, take down a building and build a new building. We have to think about more intelligent, more responsible, and also more creative ways to deal with the structures we find and to reshape them. And Markus has a fantastic project in Berlin, Haus der Statistik. So Markus, the stage is yours for some minutes, and I'm happy to see your presentation with you and discuss it with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas, for this kind introduction. Yes, I think there is a couple of slides. They should be running autonomously, so you have to bear with me while I talk sort of slightly on top of that. The two projects that I'm bringing that were also already introduced, I would call them not only projects, but rather suggest the term urban transformation laboratories somehow. And why am I interested in this term, or urban practice as another term? I think both projects show very well that it is possible to enter complex territories with complex questions and to, in order through acting together and through building them together, find ways to inhabit these complexities. And for me, this is super interesting because coming from planning, there is always an idea of simplification, of abstraction, and of normatization. And we live in a moment of society where we want to come beyond that, where we're interested in accepting the difference and to create environments that accommodate and welcome difference rather than normatize and standardize. So the first project, and this is a very nice image to show now, is Haus der Statistik. As introduced, it was sort of an as-found building, derelict and empty as an office building centrally located in Berlin, just off Alexanderplatz. And this building was discovered, more or less, by a group of artists and activists in 2015, claiming this was the moment of the so-called refugee crisis, when many new people arrived in Berlin, and the question for space became a new sort of urgency. And this moment, the artistic and activist community suggested that this building could be a place for arts and culture and education, and also for people coming with a migrational interest. Interesting enough, the politics side of Berlin picked up, and very quickly a sort of process unfolded that has a couple of milestones. I would say the first milestone was that the mayor of the district got in touch with the activists and said, this is actually a good idea, let's transform this building. The second milestone of this process was that the building was still in, let's say, a complex ownership situation. The Land of Berlin acquired the building and is now it's in public ownership, so it can be discussed on a local level how to develop the building. And the third milestone is that there was a very special, and this is kind of model anew, a very special cooperation agreement was signed between the city, the district, the Berlin's housing company, and the Berlin's real estate management company, together with the civic society as the fifth partner called Co-op 5, to develop this site and this derelict building on eye level together without sort of outvoting any of the partners. This has not been done like that before in Berlin, and it's really this new model of a civic-public partnership that is taking place here. What I think is also special is that as soon as this process started, we suggested that we don't want to plan it top-down, but we want to learn from the site itself through inhabitation and through use, and through making the place together during the phase of use, discover the potentials and the interests also of the civic society and the city that is there today. What happens in these kind of processes is that you start with, we want a space for arts, culture, education, and affordable living. And as soon as the activities start, they become illustrated or they become adopted, and they start to transform. So now we have an interest group around recycling, reuse, and the question of materiality and resources in society, where people from the arts mix with many other people and with different backgrounds. We have a group organized around food questions, around the countryside-city relationship, and so on. But also a theater group and people talking about educational questions, as you can see here. So I think the point is, if we enter these complex situations in a collaborative mode, we have a lot of negotiations to do, but we also discover during the phase of use and through the difficulty of these negotiations, another potential future than if we would just sit in our offices and draw it top down. Which brings me to the second example. Sorry, I have to turn around because these screens are a little bit light. The second example is called floating university. And my colleague likes to say it's not floating and it's not a university, introducing this question of a contradiction in itself. But what is it? You saw some diagrams about the evolution of the place. I think and there's many stories that can be told. One is the story of the hardware, and it's a sort of discovery in the middle of the city off Tempelhof Airfield, a very beautiful spot of a thing that is, described to the end for our administrational perspective as a rainwater retention basin of the airport. So whenever it rains and the sort of concrete surfaces of the airport collect water, it is collected here and then slowly diffused into the canal. That's the technical functionality. And for, I don't know, maybe 70 or 80 or more years, this is what this place did. Apart from doing this, the place has become a place that is inhabited by endangered species, by amphibia. Also, this reed island that you can see there in some of the pictures started to grow because it wasn't cleaned as properly as before. And suddenly, this place that is a technical infrastructure also is a place for biodiversity, for basically nature, if we want to use that term in the post-Anthropocene moment, where nature is coming back and helping us sort of to clean the polluted waters that are coming from the street surface. And this amazing sort of double layer a third layer has been added, which is humans come in. And these humans are interested in cohabitation, in being friends with the technical infrastructure, but also with the amphibia, and to inhabit what I like to call this contaminated paradise, because in fact the water collecting all the kind of surface rub-offs from the tires and so on from the nearby street, in fact you should not really want bath in it. So we have this situation that it looks like a fantastic dream place, but we know rationally that it's not. And for us, this is such a beautiful and also hard metaphor, or let's say an inhabitable kind of place where the contradictions of humanity in living with the planet today can be felt and can be dealt with in some way.
So it's really also an interesting example if we talk about cohabitation. That cohabitation, of course, doesn't only mean a cohabitation among humans, but also cohabitation with other species and plants that help you actually dwell in a more sustainable way. A beautiful project, by the way. You see this image on the left. There is a Japanese building that was not done by you. How did the Japanese building migrate into that structure? And did you learn something from that Japanese building inside your structure?
Yeah, exactly. This is, it's not in the image anymore. It's Atelier Bauhaus, and it's called the Urban Forest. It was part of the exhibition Die Wohnungsfrage, the housing question. And it was invented and set up as a sort of one-to-one model that can be used. And this is actually its third appearance. The first one was in the museum context. The second was also co-organized by my colleague Benny to have it rebuilt in Tempelhof Airport as a kids' play structure. And this is the third one.
It's maybe interesting to know that this structure is also reusing other architectures in different ways. If we look at it, it looks very beautiful and very simple, and you think it looks so convincing that you think it has been always there. But of course, it's very hard, and this brings us, we're here in Brussels, in the epicenter of bureaucracy, and it brings us to a very important question, because when we see these things, we think it's beautiful. We want to live like that. We want to try out these forms. Shigeru has, in his previous talk, already mentioned it's not very easy to convince the authorities, the commissioner, to build a house in paper because people think it can burn. It's also maybe not very easy to convince the authorities to build something in a water basin like that. So if you had a wish when it comes to make these things more easy, and hopefully we have a lot of politicians listening to us, what would be your wish as an architect to be able to realize these fantastic ideas you have quicker and more efficiently? Because I think we all agree that these are beautiful experiments, but then we ask ourselves, why are there so little? Yeah? And why don't we see many more paper tube houses all over the world done by Shigeru, and more projects like the floating university? And there must be a reason, and my fear is that this lays in the legal framework. So can you say a word before I open the discussion to the rest of the team to the question, what is preventing us from doing much more things like that in the time that we still have, because climate change isn't waiting for laws to change on slow pace?
Well, I would like to bring in the term risk, and maybe most of these projects are done under the umbrella of that it's art. And when it's art, that's one of the segments of society where there's still a certain freedom to do things that are not yet fully tested. And I think I'm suggesting, and we're working with Berlin Politics on this, to introduce something like a department for urban practice, so that this kind of thinking of let's enter an open-ended process of collaborative reinvention of a place also has sort of stakeholders on the administrative side.
Yeah. So this is also for those who are architects among you here. It's a very good tip. Maybe if you can't get a permit for an experimental building, you can try to frame it as art, as the performance stage, and actually there are some examples where that helped. Shigeru, have you ever been tempted to say, I can't sell it in building as architecture, I declare it a piece of art and push it through differently? Or what were your struggles with law?
Actually, we have been facing a similar problem, I think. So you said that this is art. I always said this is temporary, because nobody believes that building can be permanent with paper. But from my experience, it's much easier to get the permission, okay, if we say this is temporary, and this is temporary looking. But as I showed before, when the building are loved by people and become the symbol of the city, people like to keep it, and this become permanent. And then maybe we can get permission later, because even for temporary building, I meet the local regulations, so that there's no difference between temporary and permanent. So I work with engineer. So that was a similar strategy. You said this is art. I said this is just a temporary.
Yeah.
So,
but as somebody who has a background in Japanese architecture, but who has worked in America and Europe, would you say that the European legislation is especially hard and bureaucratic when it comes to realizing?
Actually, I don't study architecture. I didn't study architecture in Japan, so I didn't know the situation. That's why I could do it, because I didn't know what we are not supposed to do. But anyway, Japan has a more difficult regulation for fire and structure. So actually, there are more examples of a permanent paper building in Europe or other cities than Japan. So bureaucratic things is more difficult in Japan.
Because I think it's a very important topic that if we talk about sustainable material often is material that burns easily. And if you work
that's a prejudice, because wood can be burned also.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the paper tube is industrial material. You can make fire protected very easy, because we have a standard fire protected wallpaper. So paper is industrial material.
Yeah.
That's why it's easy to waterproof and easy to fire protected.
Yeah. I would also ask the question to John Schellenhuber, who is with us in Rome, who is at the same time a scientist and somebody who is very active in politics now in Europe. John, would you say it's more important, firstly, to change the legal framework of what we can do with materials like wood and paper before we actually start about thinking of what we can build? Or where do you think is the biggest obstacle? You are somebody who discovered, as you wrote in a beautiful text in Frankfurter Allgemeine, very lately the role of architecture in climate change. You said it was the elephant in the room that you didn't see for a long time, and then you discovered that like 40% of greenhouse gases are connected to the built world, and you are now one of the most prominent defenders and propagators of building with wood. But of course, there are many legal problems. So what do you think is the most urgent thing we should do if we really want to come up with what the Germans call a Bauwende, a change in the building policy?
Okay, first of all, can you hear me, Niklas?
We hear you very well, and we see you at monumental scale.
Excellent. Because I'm in the parallel Bauhaus universe here in Rome. We are doing a conference at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. In the Vatican, we had Ursula von der Leyen as a keynote speaker this morning, Moses Carey and Shigeru. Hello, Shigeru. He will join us tomorrow, actually. So this is a world of distributed places connected by the internet. In a way, this is a metaphor for the future. On your question, when I realized some 10 years ago that the climate equation can only be solved if we transform the built environment, which is producing the bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions, for example, when I tried to develop a narrative how if we give up conventional architecture and turn to nature-based solutions, in particular nature-based renewable materials, then we actually can not only reduce emissions, but we can even undo historical emissions, because, you know, if a tree grows and by photosynthesis, it's sucking up CO2, it's the fruit in the atmosphere. And if you turn this wood into a long-lasting product, in particular into buildings, when you have extracted CO2 from the atmosphere, so we can make up actually undo historical emissions. So when I started to think more about it and discussed it, and I encountered a number of companies working with timber, for example, small and medium-sized enterprises, I heard them complaining all the time about the bureaucracy, as we just discussed. So the fire regulations, the earthquake regulations, what have you. And they complained that they often couldn't realize their projects because even the lowest level of bureaucracy was like a concrete wall where we ran against them. But when I discovered that these companies, these people, these organizations are highly fragmented, and what they lacked was a common narrative, so to speak. And the narrative here comes from climate science because, and this is, I'm really serious about it, if we do not change the way we build cities, buildings, infrastructures globally, we will go far beyond the 2 degrees warming, which we consider, scientists, the critical line. Beyond that, if we go to 3, 4 degrees, human civilization as we know it will cease to exist. I'm absolutely serious about that. So, but if instead...
As a question to you as a scientist, we have a strange paradox in the world of architecture. At the one hand, we know that we should better not build too much to protect the environment. At the same time, there is still an influx of millions and millions of people in the big cities of the world, and according to UN statistics, up to 1 billion apartments would have to be built in the next 30 years if we don't change that situation. So how do you deal as a scientist and as somebody who's recently started to get very involved with architecture, how do you solve that paradox of a necessity to not build so much, especially not with concrete and glass, and the necessity to house all the people who come to the cities? Or do you think this assumption by the UN is false?
No, I will come back actually to your first question, which I haven't answered yet. But before I go to your second question, I mean, there's no contradiction here. If you have a building stock which is in principle functional, like we have in Europe, of course you should retrofit it, you should make it climate neutral, climate friendly, whatever. That's okay. But 80% of the buildings we need, for example, in Africa, for the growing population there, that's not built yet. And now comes the beautiful story. If you build them from timber, for example, from bamboo and other, you will not only be climate neutral, you will be climate positive. Because the more you build, the more walls you build from massive timber, for example, the more you suck up carbon from the atmosphere. Of course, you need sustainable forestry to deliver this biomass to be harvested. But you see, the more you build, the more you extract CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's what most people just don't get. Now, I'm trying to communicate that to the world and to the Commission and to the United Nations, and it's slowly sinking into the debate. And here is my narrative, so to speak. With this narrative, that the biggest perpetrator of climate change, namely the built environment, can be turned into a saint, if you like, into a savior of the global climate system, then of course we have a powerful story to tell. And this is the story we are offering the Bauhaus Day and so on to all the people who try to overcome this obsolete conventional way of building with steel and concrete and glass and aluminium and plastics and so on. And so my answer to your first question is, if we are able to spread the word, communicate a powerful story, then of course we will be able also to change regulations. But what I learned from all these concrete project developers is they run against the lowest level of bureaucracy and they cannot convince them, of course. So it has to come top down, really. So that's what I suggested also to Ursula von der Leyen, to the Commission, that Brussels, with the European Union, is starting a reform debate across Europe, how regulations have to be further developed in order to allow to build climate friendly. But in the end, you need a very good story to tell, and I think we found the perfect story here.
So part of the good story that John Schellenhuber is asking us and you to create is, of course, a narrative that is not restricted to building, that is not restricted also to Europe. And this brings me to our other panelists here. I'm very happy to have you on the panel because you are a climate activist, and I think it's essential to discuss also the effects that especially European policies have had in the past, but still have in our present when we discuss the future of the city, because the future of the city, of course, is also the future of the cities in Uganda. Many African countries have an exploding population, have the highest birth rates, and so there are many urbanistic and town planner questions coming up in the forthcoming years. During my travels in Africa, I have seen many leapfrog inventions in countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, where Europeans can actually learn a lot from in terms of how technology is used to better processes of farming, of how technology is used in terms of running cities differently. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about your how you got to become a climate activist in Uganda, and how you see the role of Europe, of also Europe's economic activities and economic activities of European and international companies in Uganda, because I think that is a big part of your work to basically create a critical knowledge about what is happening in Uganda in these days.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I come from Uganda, a country that is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Uganda is located in the Horn of Africa, and Africa as a continent emits barely 4% of the global greenhouse emission. And my country, Uganda, is the 12th most vulnerable country in the world to climate change, and also the 49th country least prepared to combat its effects. In Uganda, I live in the capital called Kampala, which was designed by the colonial government to serve their interests in the 19th century. And it is one of the poorly planned cities in the world, as it cannot even stand 30 minutes of rain. In Kampala, rain means a bad day due to the so-called bad weather. Rain in Kampala is worse than snow in Brussels. Almost everything gets paralyzed. You cannot move from one place to the other. Some people remain in their beds, traffic gets crazy, children find it difficult to go to school, and transport fares are increased. Flooding washes away people's beddings, among others. Kampala is a dumping ground for all the unwanted vehicles, clothes, and many more harmful products from developed countries like in the global north. Most parts of Kampala are not livable, even for children. All this rainwater carrying waste ends up in our resources, in water resources, lakes, rivers. I lead a lake cleanup on Africa's largest lake, which is Lake Victoria, which is a source of livelihoods for over 40 million people. I do this to beat plastic pollution, but also to preserve and protect our water bodies. Research says that this lake will be no more in 100 years, and we don't want that to happen. So my love for nature got me up to mobilize my fellow students, and we started Fridays for Future Uganda. It's a youth organization that demands climate justice. So this organization became a voice of the voiceless, and up to date, the organization has grown into Uganda's leading youth climate organization, which has inspired many on the African continent. More than 7 million people, about twice the size of the greater Kampala population, die annually due to air pollution. And air pollution is estimated to be more deadly in Africa than malnutrition and unsafe sanitation. Monitoring is the first step towards pollution management, but access to this information of air quality data is a major challenge for Africa and for the global south, largely because of the prohibitive costs of air quality monitoring. According to the latest UN report, cities consume 78% of the world's energy and produce more than 60% of the greenhouse emissions. Moreover, residents of just 100 cities account for 20% of humanity's overall carbon footprint. From transportation to construction to food waste, no other entity emits as many greenhouse gases as the cities. So as the most densely populated settlements have had the most experience in grappling with addressing these social and environmental inequalities, they are also the best equipped to offer models on how to promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing holistic oppression on front lines and vulnerable communities. Part of my work is the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. This is the pipeline that is operated by an European company, the Total Energies, which is a French company. This pipeline, if it's built, will be the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline. It will be 1,445 kilometers long. It will come from my country, Uganda, through Tanzania and to the port of Tanga. This pipeline has displaced over 100,000 people, households. Over 400 villages have been displaced. Our sources of income and livelihoods are at risk. I'm about to lose my village if this pipeline goes through. But these multinational companies keep doing the same to African countries, even when Africans do not really benefit from these economic activities. They say that Africans will develop, but we are not a continent that can develop with oil or coal or gas. We are an agricultural economy, and we depend on that for our livelihoods, and that is how it has been for years. This is our lineage. This is our culture and tradition. We are farmers, and we depend on that for our living. We cannot survive with oil or coal being produced. So we need more investments in agriculture, in green energy, in renewable energy that will develop our countries and cities, but not in fossil fuels.
I'm curious, Hilda, to hear if in your work as an activist who wants to prevent also European companies from destroying the country, from doing very unsustainable developments in Africa, have you encountered any help by European politicians, by the European Union? Is there any contact person in Kampala where you could address with these problems and say, we want to work with you on a different narrative together with Europe, or would that still have to be founded?
That will still have to be founded, but at the moment we work with over 100 civil society organizations that are around the world. And for the last 2 months, I came to Europe to create awareness about the East African crude oil pipeline, and also to ask people of Europe to support us in creating awareness, but also asking the governments to stop funding, to ask financial banks and insurers to stop supporting the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline, because most of the insurers and the banks that are into this activity are in Europe. So we together with other civil society organizations had this work done.
Yeah, maybe we can pass the question to John Schellenhuber in Rome, who beautifully calls his project Bauhaus der Erde, which means Bauhaus of the earth, double meaning as the earth in the sense of material, but also as the globe. Could you imagine, or are there projects to support initiatives like Hilda's as part of an urban investment, or an investment in the urban future of not only European countries, but what Edouard Glissant, the philosopher, called so beautifully the mundaneité of the built environment?
Okay, there is some noise in the background because Ursula von der Leyen is just in the restaurant where we will have dinner. So it's interesting. Actually, yes, I think Europe should have a much closer look at our big neighbor continent, Africa. I think the future in the global south anyway, but in particular what is going to happen in Africa. And I try to encourage the European Commission actually to strike, if you like, a new deal with Africa to be completely different agriculture, learning from African context, but also providing opportunities for leapfrogging actually analog developments that go completely wrong. So, I mean, just think of what will be the most populated cities in the middle of the century. The projections are will be Kinshasa, it will be Dar es Salaam, it will be Lagos, so all sitting in Africa, for example. So the future of the planet will be decided mostly in Africa, a little bit in Asia, a little bit in Latin America. So it is in the interest, on the one hand, of Europe to help and to develop in a sustainable way. But I think it's also our damn responsibility to provide opportunities and to help them actually create a lab of new ideas, actually, and support everything.
Hear you very, John, we cannot hear you very well. Maybe, maybe sound engineer can get your voice a bit louder. In the meantime, I want to ask Shigeru, because there is almost a tradition in your work of working in many places affected by climate change. So how did you set up that project, which is not a one-time project, but almost wherever there is need of improvised architecture, temporary architecture, you show up. That was the case in many disaster sites. So I think it's important also when we discuss these ideas of how the European Union could expand their appetite from the European political borders into the world and really create something meaningful to fight global climate change on the global level. I think they can learn a lot from your endeavors. So maybe you can talk a little bit of how you set up this system of helping all over the world.
So I'm sorry, how to pronounce your name? Heidi? Hilda. You know, because I have been to Uganda when I was working for Rwanda refugees, and Kampala was really beautiful place. And also, I found out in Africa, in many of area used to have a bamboo forest. But when end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, when European people colonized Africa, because the European people doesn't know how wonderful bamboo is, how to use bamboo traditionally. That's why they cut the forest all and put the falling trees. So that's create a new problem. The people think that the panda in China is only gorilla who eat the bamboo, but it's not true. The African mountain gorilla used to eat bamboo because there was bamboo forest. I think that Europe should help to plant bamboo like before, because bamboo can be good building material. Also, you can make any craft weaving, and still some of the people in Eastern Africa, they use bamboo for the liquor. So there are so many ways to use bamboo. I think that this can be your responsibility as a European people who colonize and cut all the forests of the bamboo, bringing back bamboo for new building and for many other technologies. I think, what do you think about this?
I think it would be a good thing if bamboo is really planted, because we need to treasure what we have. We only treasure when it's gone, but if it's there, we don't see its purpose. But this is it's bringing back the traditions that were there, and I think this needs to be restored in many countries.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask Marcus, who founded at least a university, which is more than a university, if there are plans or appetites at Raumlabor to expand the floating university into a really international system and trans-European system of interventions and floating universities also beyond the European borders. Because, of course, you're very well known in Europe, but I think things like that and architectural practices like that could also work in a context that Hilda just described, in Kampala, in Goma. Are there attempts in your office or your collective to collaborate?
Yeah, I think the first answer is very simple. The floating is already a place where many people from diverse backgrounds meet. And I think this is one of the big qualities of floating, that I would call it its openness. And the very careful design of the place that once you entered, you like to stay. We were discussing about how to synchronize the programs that they fit better, but in the end we decided that if there is collisions and frictions, it's actually more interesting. And there is already university people, but also people that don't have a degree or don't come from an institutional background, that are meeting in floating and discuss on eye level. For example, Kids University exists as well. The question about transferability of this kind of practice is also an interesting one. We had a very friendly conversation with architects from South Africa at some moment that were coming to Raumlabor with a tour organized by Goethe Institute. And I think you have to be very precise about how to work in which context. Yeah. Our friends from over there were quite surprised that Goethe shows them how Raumlabor introduces this idea of informality to a context which maybe is over-formalized, a practice that they said in their environment is very, very common. So maybe it's not only about, again, exporting this kind of practices, but rather creating a mutual exchange between people on the globe about what are actually sustainable practices of spatial production, but also of exchanging and learning.
You said sustainable. This is one of the most used words on every panel in the future. And the second most used word in the European context is the smart city. And that is a concept that we encounter still in European discussions about the future of the city. It's funded with millions of euros. Whenever you say this is becoming a smart city, you still get a lot of money in Europe. And I want to hear your thoughts about it. What makes the city really smart? What are also, to your view, maybe the detrimental effects of a tech solutionist concept of the smart city that in the end maybe just consists of putting electric cars instead of combustion engine cars, but it's still cars. And so my question is maybe the smart city as we frame it now a dead end, and should there be another form of smartness? Maybe, Shigeru, you want to say something about the smart city obsession of Europeans and other continents?
Well, even in Japan, everyone and also government start talking about creating a smart city. But the smart city cannot be created without creating new employment and industry in other many smaller cities, not just bringing IT digital technology to somewhere. So important thing is that creating the new employment locally, depending on what is really available locally, instead of having these IT solutions. But that's my opinion.
Marcus, Tilda, any thoughts about what makes a city really smart?
Well, I think on one hand, we're in the middle of this of the radical transformation towards a digital society. On the other hand, I'm very, very fascinated by the notion of the material reality, and whatever way we agree to manage this material reality, it stays the same. So for me, for example, the terminology of the critical zone brought up by Bruno Latour and others creates a very, very clear image that even this idea of extractivism has limits. That with the critical zone, he describes the very few kilometers of life that are actually surrounding our planet. And if you scale out onto the planetary scale, I think it's an incredibly strong image that we are this kind of smear on the top of this rock that shoots through space. And we're actually not extracting anything from the planet and bring it out in a large scale, but all we do is we shuffle things around and we sort of change the mix. But the way we do this, we're actually approaching a scale of change that is becoming toxic. So this kind of little smear of a complex environment is more or less killed off by humanity and its actions. So whenever the smartness that is needed will help us to support the smear, I'm a total fan of that. But at the moment, I think it's much more interesting to be aware that every kind of transformation that we talk about is a transformation within an extremely limited system. And again, the fantasy of smartness, also the fantasy of the smartphone, for me is always built on a sort of fiction of, let's say, we can disconnect from this very grounding reality of a material reality.
Yeah, maybe also Hilda, I think when we look at how people live in Uganda, but also in Kenya, we find that the European distinction between city life and countryside life is more complex in these countries, and that people can be city dwellers and they can live in Kampala and still consider themselves as people who have their roots in the countryside, who go regularly to the countryside. Maybe you can say a word about the challenge that poses, because my impression was that, of course, the question of traffic between the city and the countryside, about going back and forth, is an essential question when we talk about the city of the future and climate change. And in Europe, there are all these concepts about the 50-minute city, that you should bring work and life together in a way that you don't have to take your car for half an hour to go somewhere. But I felt that, especially in Uganda, there are ideas to reframe the whole idea of the relation of the countryside life and the city life in an interesting way. Maybe you can say a word about that.
Well, in Uganda, East Africa, it's a bit different. When we say smart cities, this is a life we've never imagined. Most of us grew up from grass-thatched houses, and many of us still do. The idea of having houses built with cement and glass is something that we see in European countries. It's not something that is everywhere in Africa or in my country, for example. And this is the life we dream of And if we hear that Europe is dreaming of something even bigger, we see and think that when will we reach there? But this is a life that is not sustainable. We are used to living in a sustainable environment, sustainable world, sustainable households. And having cities constructed, well-paved roads is more of, I should say, a picture that the government or people or investors continue to shed, but is very far away from what we see. And to me, a smart city is one that is designed, its buildings are designed to have net zero energy standards, and one where the emissions are limited, that we have a chance to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius amidst other things. But what is happening in Africa is many of the people in the town or in the village are, we treasure our tradition and cultures, so we depend mostly on land. If one doesn't have land, then they are broke or they are poor, so they cannot afford life. And most of the land in the cities is owned by big people and very, very expensive, so many people cannot afford. So it's only those who can afford who can make their plans or even have to buy land in the city. So most of the people come to the city for work and then back to the villages or like the suburbs to rest or at home. But this will only, the thing is, if government puts out structures that could help with, first of all, reducing the traffic in the city, such as having trains or having monitored public transport means like we can see in Europe, where you can use the metro or you can use the bus that could be there anytime. If these structures are put in our cities, we could limit all the traffic, we could limit the problems of having to move to a place that is just 30 minutes away and you take about 2 hours. And yeah, if we could reform our plans or structures to the way that is more sustainable and also more accessible by many people, regardless of their tradition or where they are from.
Yeah. There is another phenomenon that I would love to discuss with all of you four experts, and that is that in the moment where we acknowledge that we should build less, there is a very interesting phenomenon that comes at hand, and that is that we witness the biggest production of ruins since antiquity in the northern part of the globe. Ruins of shopping malls, ruins of office towers, because not a revolution, but capitalism itself has extracted itself from the city, from the physical realm of the city, which doesn't mean that capitalism has vanished, of course. We still shop, but we shop online. We buy things online, and then little trucks come into the city from delivery centers that are called fulfillment centers in almost a religious way in Europe. And people are encouraged by their companies to stay at home because it's cheaper for the company to keep the people at home, even if that also has, of course, disadvantages. So the interesting phenomenon is that we have still ownership in the city of buildings, but these buildings are not used the way anymore that they were supposed to be used. And so there is panic among owners of shopping malls, panic among owners of office towers. And do you think this is a chance to critically re-engage with the ruins that digitalization is currently producing? Could that be a solution? That you find a legal framework, a political framework to negotiate still with the private owners of these dysfunctional space and say, let's turn them into structures like the Haus der Statistik, or to turn them into buildings where a lot of people who just moved into the city can live in. Like, could there be your refugee architecture, Shigeru, also be in a high-rise building that was designed for a big company? Or is that too naive to think like that? So can the ruins of capitalism and digitalization be a solution?
It's really true. Because of COVID, we found out we don't need so much office spaces. We can work differently. so that the development of the city, development of the people's living, working, we know it has to be different. So I think again, in Africa can be one of the experimental area to have a new way of development. Because this was very interesting word told by architect Francis Kere. He's this year's Pritzker Award winner, and I attended his ceremony. He said very interesting things. Africa doesn't need to catch up with the developed country. He said we have to develop differently. So that is, I think, is very true. That you don't have to develop the cities like us, so that this can be the new experimental place or try the different way of development of city and villages.
Marcus, what is your feeling about?
Well, I would say space available is always a great potential, and part of our work is to connect available spaces with new and maybe unexpected usabilities, and basically create a kind of open dynamics around what this space could be, but also what the space could do for the city. I think Berlin was a little bit this laboratory in the center of Europe, or in one part of Europe, where the capitalist real estate market took a break after 1990, which made huge amounts of spaces available, and which I think you can look back, created an enormous amount of creativity, of alternative uses, of let's say, market-oriented uses of space, and of other ways of living together, which, of course, now with the market coming back, is under huge pressure. So I'm totally optimistic if we have spaces available, that humans can find amazing ways to reinvent their being together.
Yeah. John in Rome, what is your thinking as somebody who has the Bauhaus, and the European Bauhaus, about the necessity of encouraging people to deal with these spaces and rebuild these spaces, but also maybe to encourage the owners of these spaces to use them differently? Can there be a legal framework and encouragement?
Okay, can you hear me again now?
Yes, we hear you perfectly well.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think for me, actually, I'm a nerve system scientist. I'm looking at the entire system. I think your question is a relevant one, but rather a marginal one. Actually, the lesson I would draw from that is refer to Shigeru here, for example. It simply shows that we have now so much space cast in stone, so to speak, in the true sense of the word. I mean, it simply means we have built the whole thing in the wrong way. If we would have built it in a decomposable way, from wood, for example, or we would do sort of a cradle-to-cradle approach to the built environment, then of course we could use the material and create new spaces, or in the course of the use of a building, it would change all the time, actually. Like in Japan, you have this traditional architecture where you change the size of the rooms and so on. I would call it fluid architecture. If you use the right material, if you use the right design principle, then actually we will not be stuck with space we don't know what to do with it, because we would adopt an evolutionary approach, actually, to architecture. That's my answer.
Thank you, John. So we already have an outline for some proposals what to do. There is the proposal to plant bamboo, where it was cut off by Europeans who thought it's just too strange of a tree to be planted there. We have John's fantastic, and I will invite you to read his proposals for a kind of circular system of wood growing and being used, and replanting and reusing it, also as a reservoir to get greenhouse gases out of the sky. But still, some things have to be built. And when I studied architecture, the first 3 years I spent building little bozzetti from concrete. They were so beautiful, and all the architects were in love with concrete. Is that love now forbidden, or would you still allow yourself to use concrete? And would you even think, under certain circumstances, we don't have to fetishize wood too much? And could concrete be a sustainable material, Shigeru-ban? Because I remember there are still buildings of yours with concrete. Is that over, or do you defend concrete?
Well,
as a
now many people, engineers company is developing new kind of concrete using recyclable sand or capturing CO2 gas inside of concrete. So there is many new technology available so that concrete is not really enemy. I think we have to take advantage of all the material differently. Concrete, steel, wood, paper, it's a different material for different purposes. So the concrete is really good material, but now it's a time to move differently.
Okay. Marcus, a secret love for concrete?
Well, it's actually one of the few permanent works by Raumlabor is made out of concrete. It's a public sculpture on the Emscher, how do you say, pathway. Of course, I went through the same training, and I'm always wondering, now that I'm also educating in architecture, what are the questions and what are the techniques we need to transmit for a next generation? And I think, for me, the question is not a technological one, because I don't think we can sort of technologically invent our way out of this with an engineering solution. So maybe it's much more about a change of perspective and a change of culture. Mm-hmm. And I'm very fascinated by this idea, at least on a European level, or by this idea of stop building, for example. A discussion that is radically changing the discipline, and of course radically challenging everything that we do in architecture when we always talk about the next house to be built. And I think it's super important that architecture students are leaving university with a sort of repertoire to deal with the existing, and also to answer the question of, let's say, a spatial need with a wider repertoire of possible answers.
Yeah. That again also a plea for a different form of education, which I think also is important when we talk about new cities in the time of global climate change, that we educate architects differently from what we did now. Europe has a very, as I said, violent and a problematic and patronizing history with quote-unquote helping Africa. So, and also many concepts developed in Europe for Africa proved to be completely inefficient, as the famous fountains that were drilled somewhere because European engineers thought it's a good idea to drill it in a place where actually no one wanted them. Hilda, what would be your wish if you could define a future cooperation of your institutions, of what you do in Uganda with the European Union? What would you say would help your endeavors most in terms of support from the European Union at this point?
Thank you. This generation of youth is very creative and very demanding, but also very intelligent. When I look at the future of architecture in Uganda, we have this group of youth that use plastic to build houses, to build homes, to build toilets where in villages where they cannot even build a latrine for themselves. And they're using the plastic that comes from Europe, because our countries are taken as dumping sites for the unwanted waste. And they are using this plastic to create a home for many homeless people. And these are the creations that really need a lot of support to help youth invent even more. Imagine if youth are using the little plastic. What if they are trained? What if they are skilled? What if they are learned? Because these are people who don't even go to school, but with a little knowledge that they grow up seeing and a lot of ideas in their brains, they can do something like that. if they get educational skills, this can be a very good chance for them to even dream about becoming the next big architectures in the world, or transforming cities like we look up to. And another way is the European Union has, I should say, the power, or they can make the decisions in terms of limiting or giving power to some of their multinational companies. For example, Total Energies, if they could talk to or try to talk Total out of the East African crude oil pipeline, which I know is possible because most of Total's financial advisors are in Europe, that could be a good way. It would mean the whole world to us, because we do not want this pipeline to be constructed in our home. We prefer biodiversity, we prefer preserving our ecosystems, but not the production of oil, because we know we cannot depend on that. And we also need assistance in security, because the East African crude oil pipeline has become a threat to many lives of human rights defenders and activists who try to speak out against this project. Many people in our countries call us non-developmental. They say we are against development. But we know that development does not come from fossil fuels. We need sustainable development, and this is our future. At a time like this, when the world is looking at transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy, we think that we deserve sustainable development and not development from fossil fuels.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that was a beautiful word to end on. The idea that we should develop a different form of development, and also see that some of the dreams of the future city in Europe, especially the smart city with all its connected tools and the Internet of Things, is of course built on an economic reality and a product reality that creates devastating effects in Africa, starting with the extraction of materials, raw materials for computers and smart products. So I think it's important to raise, as you say, the awareness that we should develop a global new idea of development, which is less efficiency-driven, less tech solutionism-driven, but more solidary and more inventive and more spontaneous and more global. So thank you so much to be on the stage with us here. Thank you to Jan Schellenhuber in Rome. We, of course, could go on for hours. There's so many things to discuss, but I think we got a very good impression of what you do and or what you propose as solutions for the big questions to come. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here in the audience. Enjoy the evening. And if there are questions, I think we can informally discuss these questions downstairs or on the piazza. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of those who followed us on screen. And there is a big program tomorrow, and I invite you all to watch it. Good evening, and thank you again for coming here on stage.
Very nice.
Facilitation and moderation. Thank you to your panelists. It was super, very interesting. And ladies and gentlemen, we're taking a very short break, but do not run far, please, by all means. We would love to have you back here at 7:30, because our next guest is going to talk about the urban jungle. A lot has been said about the city of the future, of now, of cities all over the globe, and how they interact or don't, whether they're smart or not, whether capitalism has a future or not, in empty buildings or not. But there's more to say, in a very particular way, through the lens, among others, of plants. So I recommend that you are back here at 7:30. Professor Mancuso will be here as well, and what's more, he's open to your questions too. So interactive together, as the new European Bauhaus Festival proclaims, is what we're after. See you in a moment. Enjoy the free time, wriggle those toes, and move those shoulders, get the blood flowing again, so the brain is sparked and fired up again for the next speaker in 15 minutes. Thank you. Hello and welcome back again, or welcome for the first time. Whichever it is, we're happy to see you. There's still a lot of room here. Free seats in the front, so do huddle up, I would say, because you want to hear what our next guest has to say. In 30 years, I think it has been mentioned before in one of the panels, by 2050, that is, 2/3 of people on this planet will live in urban areas. If you know that cities consume large quantities of energy and natural resources, as was mentioned by Hilda, among others, in the earlier panel, you can conclude that they are responsible for huge amounts of CO2 emissions and waste. So, how can the concept of an urban jungle help to counter those facts and help recreate urban areas as long-lasting ecological niches? Our next guest is Professor Stefano Mancuso. He's a biologist at the University of Florence in Italy, and he specialized in plants, and he discovered how sensitive and communicative they are, to the extent even that they help rethink human relationships. They're an inspiration in how to create an environment, literally with the environment, but also among us humans, that is sustainable, that allows each and every individual to live in a free-breathing way together with all the others. Professor Mancuso has worked, among others, to put his ideas in practice in Prato, near Florence. I'm curious about that, so I might ask you a question about that later, if you don't mention it yourself in your talk. So, the professor will share his concepts and ideas with us, and is open to your questions. So be prepared. I will be among you with my microphone. Just put up your hand when you have a question for him, and I'll be the mediator between the two of you. But first, Stefano Mancuso with what he has to tell you. Professor, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, having the chance to talk about my preferred subject, plants, what they did for us, and what they can do for solving the biggest problem that humanity had in the course of its history, that it's global warming. And so, but let's start with some number, because we are normally blind to plant. We don't see plant because we are animals, and we just look at the reality with our animal eyes. We did everything in an animal way. Our organization are animal. Our way to work with the resources, it's animal. But plants have a completely different way to cope with reality. And it's a way that was so incredibly successful that, that was not my first one, but it's not important. I will tell you about the amount of plants. Because the first thing to know is how many plants there are on the planet. Just to show you how much we are blind to the plant. 86% of the biomass, that it's the weight of life, is made by plant. So if we would be able to wait, to put on a balance all the life on Earth, we would see that plants account for 86% of the life. Animals, altogether, mammals, fishes, birds, and so on, account for an irrelevant 0.3%. So even if we think about ourselves as the dominator of the world, of the planet, from the point of view of life, we are really irrelevant, dangerous, but irrelevant. of course, everybody knows that by plants we have all the food. All the oxygen that we breathe is produced by plants. But plants are much more. The climate, the clouds are produced by the transpiration of the plant. And the plants overall are an incredible storage of CO2. So if the global warming on the planet is still not deadly, this is because of plant. So we need to ask ourselves, how is the situation of the plant? Because by the plant we are living. Plants are the engine of life. It would be a good idea to take care of this creature and to talk about the situation of plants. I want to say you something about an important date, that it's 2020. In the future, when we will look back at 2020, we will not remind or remember 2020 because of the COVID. In the same way, we are not looking back at 1918 as the year of the Spanish flu, but as the year of the First World War. So what's happened? What happened in the 2020 to be so important? Really to make 2020 a kind of epochal moment. There is a before and after 2020. So what happened was that in 2020, the amount of material produced by human exceeds the weight of the life. So the mass, in 2020, the mass of all the synthetic material produced by humanity in the course of its history exceeds the weight of the life. I don't know if you are feeling how incredible is this data. And just to help you in understanding the astonishing, dramatic data I'm telling you, 100 years ago, just 100 years ago, the amount of material produced by humanity in the course of its history was less than 1% of the life. So in one century, we have been able to reverse this percentage. And it's not easy at all. To reach such a dramatic and astonishing result, you need to work hard. You need to work from two different sides of the equation. First, you need to reduce the amount of life. And second, you need to produce as much material as you can. So let's see what we did with the first point of the equation. Starting with the plants. At the beginning of our civilization, 50,000 years ago, with the agriculture revolution, the amount of trees on the planet was 6 trillion, 6,000 billion. Today, the amount of trees on the planet is half, 3 trillion. But what is dramatic is that 2 trillions has been cancelled by us in the last 2 centuries. So among these 2 trillion trees that we cancelled in the last 2 centuries, there are, for example, all the primary forests of Europe. Today, when we hear about the state of the Amazonian forest, and we are, of course, worried, I hope so, about what is happening in Amazonian, we need to also to know that until the beginning of the 19th century, a great part of Europe was yet covered by a primary forest. Today, of that primary forest in Europe remain nothing, so not 1 tree. So we cut all the primary forest in really a handful of years. And why the primary forest is important. Why I proposed 10 years ago that who was going to cut Amazonian should be charged as with crime against humanity, because it's in the literally origin the term. So we are depending from the primary forest. Humanity depend from primary forest. The primary forests are the house of the living species. When we cut a primary forest, we cut the primary forest and all the species living inside. And life, it's a network. It's like a network made by many nodes. Any node, it's a species. When these species disappear, the network is much more weak. How much weak? The animals live in the forest. So we need to ask ourselves, how is the situation also of the animals after the destruction of the plants? In 2021, Professor Dasgupta of the University of Cambridge published a wonderful detailed report about the state of biodiversity on the planet. And from that report, we can learn that in the last 50 years, from 1970 to today, the amount of animals on the planet was reduced by half. So I don't know if you are hearing this data. In the last 50 years, we reduced by half all the animal life. Today, you know what is how are composed the mammals on the earth? 97% of the mammals are humans or animals that we grow up for feeding us. The wild mammals are just 3% of all the mammals on the planet. The birds, 85% of all birds on Earth are poultry. And the fishes are completely disappeared. There is not one model saying that in the next 50 years there will be yet some wild fish. So this is the situation. This is what we have been able to produce. Really, again, I want to stress this fact in a handful of years, in less than 1 century. This is not the fruit of our history. This is the fruit of the last century. Today, the situation is that there are much more buildings and infrastructure than trees, and that the plastic in weight is double of the weight of all animals on the planet. In the same time, something also happens that was a revolution for our life. And this is the urbanization of humanity. This is also an incredibly important point, because as was mentioned, in 1950, 30% of the global population was living in rural area. 30% was living in urban area and 70% in rural areas. In the 2050, this proportion at the global level will be completely reversed. So in 1 century, we started as 30% of people living in urban area in the 1950, and we will be 70% living in urban area in 2050. In 1 century, it's an astonishing velocity. Even today, in many regions of the world, the amount of people living in urban areas is incredibly high. In Italy, it's 71%. In Germany, it's 75%. In France, in Spain, in the UK, it's more than 80%. And in Belgium, you are world champion. 98% of the population lives in urban area. This is it was a phenomenon so incredibly fast and so important that change is changing the habit of our speeches. This is an important point. The difference between a generalistic speeches and a specialistic speeches. It's a biological point, but it's something that it's happening to us. What is a generalistic speeches? A generalistic speeches is a speeches that is able to live everywhere, is able to cope with many environments, is able to use a variety of resources. We were a generalistic species together with rats and mice. We were able to adapt to every environment and to live and to multiply in every corner of the planet. On the opposite, there are specialistic species like the koala or the panda bear. They are able just to live in specific environment. When they are in such specific environments, they are incredibly good. But when that environment change, they are, of course, more likely to become extinct. So, to understand what the cities are becoming for us, we need to introduce another ecological concept, the concept of niche. The city is the ecological niche of humanity today. And what is a niche? This is a cactus. A cactus is a specialistic species. It's incredibly good in living in a special environment, that it's the desert. Inside of the desert, the cactus grow faster than any other organisms. It's able to multiply. It's able to colonize all the deserts. But outside of the desert, is unable to live, to survive. The cities are becoming exactly what the desert is for a cactus, for us. It's the only place where we are able to live. And inside of the cities, as any specialistic species, we are incredibly productive. This is why we are all together moving to urban areas. Because in urban areas, our productivity is incredibly higher. I think more or less 5 years ago, in a survey linking urbanization and the GDP, the gross domestic product, we have been able to see that this is a survey that's been done in 180 different countries. An increase in the urbanization of a country of 10% is bring to an increase of 61% of the GDP. So this is why we are all going to live inside of the cities. But this is a danger. This is the problem. It's an incredible danger because cities, irrespective of their history or their geographical localization, are a very specific environment, incredibly specific. Like a desert, all the deserts are more or less similar. All the cities are more or less similar. And is the idea of the city that is bringing us to a no-return point. Because how we imagine our city, this is the point. Look at this. They are two of a series of Renaissance painting produced by unknown Italian artists about the ideal city. Look at these two. And this is probably the most famous, has been attributed to Leon Battista Alberti, the father of Renaissance architecture. If you look at these ideal cities, they have something in common. There is nothing except buildings. There is no nature, not a single plant, not an animal, nothing. Because the idea that we have of the ideal city is of a place of humanity, the place just of humanity. The place where to live, where the human lives. No other organisms live together with us, need to live together with us. It's an ancestral idea from the beginning of when we, for the first time, we built our first house. The second thing that we did was to make a separation, something defending ourselves from a dangerous nature. But we are following buildings our city exactly in the same way as at the beginning of our history. Just as a mineral nest for our species. But this is the only way we can imagine a city. It's really, we really need just to build everything. We really need to make everything mineral. No. This is the way brought us to such number. At the moment, 70% of the energy of the world is consumed by city. 75% of the resources of the planet are consumed by cities. And they produce 75% of the CO2 emission and 70% of the waste. And the funniest part is that cities are just 1.7% of the habitable land of the earth. So it's nothing, an irrelevant part of the surface of the planet. So we are all packing ourselves very densely in such an incredible small amount of surface and producing the source of the change that make ourselves in danger. Because when I was talking to you, saying that specialistic speeches are very easily extincted because of change in behavior, this is exactly what we are doing. The change, at the moment, we are producing by cities that threatening dangerous problem that is global warming. Global warming is something that probably is not really felt in its entirely importance. Global warming is unanimously declared as the biggest problem that humanity had in the course of its history. At the moment, the temperature of the planet is 1.5, more or less, degree higher than in the pre-industrial level. You all know. But do you really know what means 1.5 degree more? What means 1.5? Think about your... Normally, when we think about 1.5 degree, it's nothing. Okay, probably it's a little bit more, a warmer winter, a better springtime. But you need to think about the temperature of your body. We have 36.5 degrees on average of temperature. If we add 1.5, arriving at 38, we are in a condition that it's incompatible on the long time with the life. The last time the planet had the same amount of carbon dioxide of today, 421 ppm, part per million, was at the beginning of the Pliocene period. At that time, the temperature of the planet was 4 degrees more than today. Antarctic was partially forested, covered by forest, and the level of the sea was 25 meters higher. This is what will happen. Einstein was saying, if you have the same equation and you make always the same, with the same factor, you will get always the same result. In the next 1,000 of years, this is what will happen. But if you want to see what will happen in a shorter time, you can go on the the website of the Polytechnic of Zurich, where there is the current against the future cities, where you can put the name of your city to understand in 2070, in another 50 years, what will be the climate of your city. And so you will discover that Rome in 2050 will have the climate of today, Tunisia, that Paris in 2070, will have the climate of today, Istanbul, and that Brussels in 2070 will have the climate of today, Canberra. And you need also to ask yourself, okay, maybe for Brussels it's an improvement. But for Istanbul, or for Tunisia, or for Marrakesh, what will happen in 2070? And you can see there that most of that town will be literally not more livable place. Today, 0.8% of the surface of the planet is not livable for health limit. In 2070, this is a share of the surface of the planet will increase to 18%. On that 18%, today lives 2 billion of people that will move, not because they are going to find better economic condition. They will move because in the place where they are living today, it will be not more possible to live. This is the global warming. So all the rest is nothing. We all should be just interested in solving this problem. And to solve this problem, of course, we have a lot of discussion, and even during this festival, we heard a lot about decreasing the emission of CO2. It's how many years is that we are talking about decreasing emission? 50 years at least. And what's happening to the CO2 emission? They are increasing each year more than the last year. Between the 1990 and 12 and 2000, each year the CO2 was increasing by 1 ppm. Between 2000 and 2020, each year by 1.5. Between 2020 and 2020, by 2. So what we are doing is to produce each year more CO2, not less. And why this is happening? Because there is a very strict relationship between the production of CO2 and the richness of a country. No country will never reduce its richness. To do that, we need to wait at least another between 50 and 70 years to have the technological advances that will make us able to remain with the same level of richness but producing less CO2. But we have not 50 years. We need to find somewhere 50 years. And how can we do? We need to plant as many trees as we can. How many? 1 trillion trees. We need to plant another 1 trillion trees on the planet. It seems an incredible number, almost impossible. Normally, when you talk about 1 trillion trees, people say, oh, come on, 1 trillion, how much it will cost? There is no space on the planet. It's impossible to organize such an unbelievable effort. But we are talking about solving the biggest problem of humanity. The cost, it's irrelevant. The space, there is the space, sure. This is the global land use. So how we use today the land of the planet. But what is important is this 50% of the habitable land, it's used by agriculture, 50%. And okay, you say, we need to eat, and it's true. But let's have a look at how we use this 50%. I don't know if you can see, but I'm telling you, 77% of this 50% is used for livestock, for animals. And we produce by animals 20% of the calories used by the humanity, and 23% of the protein. And with the remaining 20% of land used directly for the cultivation of plants, we have 80% of the calories and 77% of the proteins. So you can understand that it's completely nonsensical, illogical way to use the land. Now I'm not telling you to become all vegetarians, but reduce of 1/4, 25% less animal product. And trust me, if you reduce 25% the animal food, you don't realize that you are doing something. By reducing 25% the animal food, we would save an amount of land that is paired to the surface of US. On that surface, we could plant 2 trillion trees, not 1, solving forever the problem of the global warming. Okay. A huge amount, the biggest part of this plan should be planted inside of the town, inside of the cities. Today, cities are, as I already told you, completely mineral. The arboreal surface of the cities of the planet, it's at the maximum 30%, but few cities in the world arrive to 30% of surface used by trees. Normally, in Europe, it's less than 10%. we did studies showing that the cities of the planet could accommodate at least 300 billion of trees. And this will change everything. This would change everything because we need to fix the CO2 where the CO2 is produced, in the cities. It's not so relevant when we produce CO2 here in Europe and we plant trees in Uganda. Doesn't work. We need to put trees where we produce CO2. And it's something that it's possible to do. And to arrange such a huge amount of plant in our cities, we need a new solution. We need to imagine a new way for our cities. We need to imagine something like this, where trees are not planted in the canonical place, in the parks, in the garden, in the flower bed. No, we need to put everywhere trees. In every place where it's possible to put a plant should be there. So, I think that my time is gone. Just a last slide. So this is my ideal city. This is the way we should imagine an ideal city as a place where plant, human, and animals live together. An ecosystem that it's, cities are monoculture of human. And as you know, every monoculture is not stable. Every monoculture is incredibly weak. We need to produce a new urban ecosystem, and we hope that the new urban Bauhaus will help with this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mancuso. And as promised, during Professor Mancuso's speech, I saw some of you nod from time to time. I didn't see anyone do this. But I can imagine that some of you want to go into what has been said deeper or have a question, a practical one. For one, why haven't we already put all these trees out there if it's so easily done and such an effective solution?
It is a cultural heritage. So really, there is no technical, not economical issues about. I will give you an example. Think about our buildings, how they are made. The indoor of our building, no? I am a professor, so I never saw a school place in the university, from the first years until the university, with plants. Why? Why all our schools, our hospitals, our prisons, our hospice are completely deprived by plants? Is there any reason? No. It's just a matter of a culture. You have no idea about the incredible amount of benefit that having the plant inside would bring to us. Just to give you an example of one of the last papers published about what's happening in a school. When you put a plant inside of a classroom, after 2 years, the students increase the level of vote, I don't know how to say, sorry for my bad English, by 30%. The social life inside of the class was incredibly higher. And the number of days of maladies was reduced by 45%. Can you imagine any other single factor with such a small amount of money changing so rapidly the fate of a classroom. I don't think there is anything similar.
But I see someone else with a question, because I
Okay.
wasn't going to be the only one, Professor. Here I come. Please tell us who you are and then ask your question. Fire away. I'm going to keep a hold of the microphone. I've been taught by experience. So here we go.
Hello, my name is Maarten Vermeer. I am the CEO of the Institute for Erasmus Peace Solutions, an NEB partner that's building an NEB university with all other NEB partners, NEB friends and associated NGOs. My question would be, can we learn for developing the new humanism we are at the moment developing? Can we learn also from plants, how plants interact with other plants? Can we take lessons from that also for redesigning how we human beings behave amongst ourselves towards other human beings?
Well, it's a wonderful question, but also require a very long answer. Because
you have 10 minutes, Professor.
Okay. So everything in our society, in our living style, has been inspired by the fact that we are animals. So let's, for example, our society, how it's built. All of every organization, human organization, how is made? Is made exactly as we are. We are hierarchical, with a brain governing specialized organs. So we have 2 lungs for earth, for breathing, we have 2 eyes, we have 1 stomach, just 1 or 2 organs, specialized. And what we did is to take this kind of organization and to reproduce everywhere. Look at your organization, I'm pretty sure that there will be a head, and the specialized organs under the head. My university is made in the same way. Our governments are made in the same way. Our computer are made in the same way. There is a processor that it's the head, and there is also and different specialized organs inside. But it's the only way to build an organization, and is the better way to build an organization. If you ask me, I would have asked for a plant organization in my body. Why? Because animal organizations are so incredibly weak. It's enough that 1 organ fail and the entire organization fail. Now, why plants have no single or double organs? Because they evolved to be resistant. You can remove 90% of a plant and the plant is still living. A plant makes something completely different with respect to us. We are concentrating specialization. The plant is diffusing. So, in other words, a plant breathes with all the body, see with the whole body, think about with the whole body. And this is a much modern way to imagine an organization. Internet is made exactly as a plant. There is no central command, there is not a command center. So this is just to give you a first example about what we could learn by plant. Diffuse organization against centralized organization. Second, it's something that when you are still living, so if you are unable to move away from the place where you were born, the community, so the other living organisms around you became extremely important for you. During the lockdown, the hard lockdown when we were stuck in the house, our community was incredibly important, not for supporting us, because we were unable to move. I will give you, so when we animals, we say that we solve the problems, 90% of the times we escape our problems. So we use movement to move away from the problem, but the problem is still there. In the case of the plant, this is not possible. In the case of the plant, when there is a problem, the problem must be solved. And they can do that because of their organization, because of their incredible strong sense of a community. We have this false idea that competition is the main force shaping living organism on Earth. This is true just for animals, for few animals. So it's true just for the 0.3% of the life. It's an irrelevant part of the life that work through competition. The rest, the 99% remaining, work through collaboration. That in the life it's called symbiosis. Symbiosis is the most important and powerful source of evolution.
Thank you, Professor.
Nothing.
And I'm sorry to say, yes, you can applaud him, of course.
Thank you.
There are more people with questions for you, but I'm on a strict time budget, so I cannot allow the question to be asked here and now. But the upside is that there are some minutes now, 15 minutes, that will change the scenery, or the stage rather, and you are still around. You're not on
Yes,
the time
I'm here.
budget. Aha.
I'm just going down.
Voila. Do mingle, ask your question in person, have a conversation. That's what
Okay.
it's all is about.
You are welcome.
By all means, thank you, Professor, for making yourself available
Thank you.
to us. One last big round of applause. Professor Mancuso, thank you so much.
Thank you. Grazie.
And when you're ready discussing this very important issue with Professor Mancuso and amongst each other, don't forget to come back by 8:30, because we have one last event, something you will want to see. A dance company is here to bow out this busy day in a soulful way. So hope to see you at 8:30. Thank you very much for being here. Enjoy the rest of the evening.